Hello, everyone, and welcome to Gorilla Whale, a Godzilla watch-along podcast. I am your kaiju consultant, Kevin Carpenter.
And I am the kid knee-deep in the touch pool at the aquarium, Kayla Knudsen.
Thank you all for joining us once more on this journey through the franchise that is Godzilla. Today, we are going to be talking about Godzilla, King of the Monsters, the 1956 movie, not to be confused with the 2019 movie Godzilla, King of the Monsters, which was created by Legendary. Kayla, you have your hand up?
I'm so sorry. I believe it is Godzilla, King of the Monsters.
Okay, you're calling me out on this, but I feel like it's King of the Monsters. Hang on.
It very well might be.
So 2019 is Godzilla, King of the Monsters. And then the 1956 is Godzilla, King of the Monsters.
Okay. All right.
Calling me out.
You are
calling me out on Godzilla, Kayla? You're questioning my Godzilla knowledge on this.
Somebody has to keep you on your toes.
Fair enough.
Commas are not often used these days like that in movie titles.
But this isn't these days. Okay. This is 1956.
I know. Well, that's what I'm saying. The people are unfamiliar with ancient cinema techniques. So should we refer to this one as King of the Monsters, and then the 2019 one will be King of the Monsters when we talk about it later?
That sounds about right.
Okay, cool. All right, give me the historical context on this piece of cinema.
The historical context for what, Kayla?
Godzilla, King of the Monsters.
I'm glad you asked. A film that
it's technically a film.
I'm glad you asked. So, the historical context for this movie. In 1955, producer Edmund Goldman purchased the American theatrical and television rights for Godzilla from Toho. Teaming up with Jewel Enterprises, Goldman looked to bring the kaiju to an overseas audience. However, this was still 1955. To make the movie more relatable to American audiences, the team would move forward with re-editing and redubbing much of the movie. Direct allusions to the H-bomb, atom bomb, Nagasaki, and the nuclear testing at Bikini Atoll were changed. English dubbing for the film was recorded around a table in 5 hours, with none of the voice actors... Huh?
I could tell!
Yeah. And none of the voice actors the voice actors weren't even seeing the footage they were dubbing over. They were literally just reading parts of the script at different speeds, and then they would just put in the lines that fit the timing best.
Yeah, you could tell. This was not Funimation dubbing happening over here. This was not Laura Bailey being iconic in Full Metal Alchemist or Soul Eater or Dragon Ball Z or on High School Host Club. The list goes on. This is not... It was bad. I'm mad about it. That's an hour and 6 minutes I'll never get back watching this movie.
Well, here's the thing. They had to spend so little time on the dubbing because they had to spend so much time on placing an entirely new person into the movie. Prominent actor Raymond Burr, best known for his work in the Hitchcock thriller Rear Window and later the Perry Mason TV series, was also brought in to be the new white protagonist of the movie. Raymond would be re-edited into many of the shots along with body doubles to make it seem like he was part of the original production. In the book, Japan's Favorite Monstar, the unauthorized biography of the Big G, Richard Kay of Jewel Enterprises would attempt to justify all this effort by saying, "We weren't interested in politics, believe me. We only wanted to make a movie we could sell. At that time, the American public wouldn't have gone for a movie with an all-Japanese cast. That's why we did what we did." End quote.
What you did was graffiti. A good movie. It's fine. Continue.
It is now April 1956. Godzilla is about to release with a brand new title, one that he will wear forevermore. Theaters open up to Godzilla, King of the Monsters. So Kayla.
I'm so sorry. I just had a note. Now obviously we didn't really brush up on this too much in the first episode when we talked about the original movie. I mean, Obviously it was successful, right? Like, it's not like Godzilla was a cult classic. Like, it was commercially successful when it was released, right?
Yeah.
Was this one?
It got mixed reviews. A lot of them sort of in the 5, 6 out of 10 kind of range. But this movie was also the main introduction to Godzilla. And if it weren't for this movie, then more than likely Godzilla would have stayed a piece of Japanese only pop culture. So
No, I'm not.
it's weird.
Listen, as much as I'm about to rag on this movie, I do understand that its existence is crucial for me, an American, enjoying Godzilla minus one.
Mm-hmm.
I get that the way that American pop culture and Japanese pop culture, like that exchange that we have going on. It's not that like other countries aren't sharing pop culture, but the thing is, like, I mean, anybody'll tell you American pop culture is an overshadowing and dominating force in the worldwide media. Like, Hollywood pumps out movies that everybody sees. Even though Bollywood actually is pumping out more movies, a lot of them don't make it out of India, really. Like, they don't penetrate American pop culture the way that American movies penetrate everybody else's pop culture. And there's a lot of reasons about why that's a thing. You know, we're not here to get into it. But it is interesting to me. I do feel like there is kind of a special, for lack of a better term, like a special connection specifically between Japan and America and our pop culture exchange that you see in the way that certain like anime and manga will absolutely be like biting off of American works. And then American works bites off of specific anime and manga that we love. It is beautiful to me, the cultural exchange that is happening. And I'm sure that there's a lot of people who made really wonderful essays and articles talking about that more articulately and why that happens. And I get it. Like, this movie helped, technically.
Mm-hmm.
Just you tell them what they did, Kevin. Tell them how they massacred my boy.
Let's go into it. We open on the ruins of a destroyed Tokyo. American foreign correspondent Steve Martin, who is not to be confused with American comedian Steve Martin, pulls himself...
Steve Martin wasn't even... Steve Martin was... He was born in the he's old. He was born in the 1950s, but he wasn't like a famous comedian yet.
He wasn't famous, but this will come back in a later Godzilla movie. Anyway.
Oh my god!
Yeah, we'll come to that when we get to it.
Continue.
So, American foreign correspondent Steve Martin. We find him pulling himself out of the rubble as his voiceover narration guides us along, like, throughout the movie. After he's taken to an emergency hospital, Steve talks to Emiko, whom he recently met. Don't worry that most of their conversation is from the back of Emiko's head. Don't worry about it.
You don't see her face. Don't worry about it. The ADR, don't worry about it.
We see her face once. She is very clearly standing in a different room. Anyway.
Also, the words coming out of her lips aren't matching her lips. She's a great ventriloquist, and she's choosing this incredibly appropriate moment to practice.
We then flash back to a time before all of this destruction. Steve was originally going to Cairo, but had a few days layover in Tokyo. He tells us he was going to meet with Dr. Serizawa, an old university buddy of his, whose research was gaining attention in the international community.
That's why Dr. Serizawa has such a good American accent. He studied abroad.
Yeah, exactly. Him and Dr. Serizawa were college buddies. He gets sidetracked, however, when he learns of the mysterious disappearances of ships at sea. Steve attends a special meeting where paleontologist Yamane suggests investigating Odo Island, which is near where the disappearances took place. It should be noted that many scenes in this movie are left in the original Japanese without subtitles, and Steve has to repeatedly ask someone else what characters in the movie are saying.
Kevin, people in 1956 couldn't read. Never mind the fact that silent pictures were a thing like 30 years ago, and they were throwing words up on the screen all the time, and silent pictures actually had a strong influence on American literacy rates going up. The people of 1956, they can't read, Kevin.
I just can't get over that they made another character for this movie, a security officer named Tomo, specifically so he could stand next to Raymond Burr, so that way Raymond Burr could like lean over to him and be like, "Hey, what are they saying? I don't speak Japanese."
Say, Tomo, my Japanese is a little rusty. What's going on here?
Steve travels to Odo Island along with security officer Tomo. It's there that Steve learns of the villagers' belief in a giant monster known as Godzilla. Steve is also present when a storm hits the village, along with another destructive force.
Bum.
Steve attends another government meeting where Yamane, who now inexplicably speaks English. He was speaking Japanese earlier, but now he speaks English.
Now he speaks English.
Yamane reiterates the need to investigate Odo Island. Steve goes back to the island with Yamane, Yamane's daughter Emiko, and ship Captain Ogata. There they find radioactive footprints, a trilobite thought to be extinct, and then Godzilla himself peeking his head over the hillside. After this encounter, Yamane tells the government that he believes Godzilla was, quote, resurrected due to the repeated experiments of H-bombs. Where were those experiments? Who was doing them? Don't worry about it. The next chunk
Also, just real quick, the fact that they use the term resurrected due to the repeated experiments of H-bombs instead of, like, released or awakened or angry because all the fish are dying and he has nothing to eat. No, he was resurrected. He's like Lizard Jesus, come again via the power of the atomic weapon.
I really appreciate how angry you are at this film, because I am also, as a Godzilla fan, I have a complicated relationship to this film because it is an artistic travesty.
I watched this movie on my day off, Kevin. On my day off.
And we appreciate it. The next chunk of the movie follows the original for the most part. Serizawa shows Emiko his oxygen destroyer research and swears her to secrecy. Meanwhile, the Japanese government tries to kill Godzilla with depth charges. That doesn't work, and Godzilla attacks. Japan then builds a giant electric fence. That doesn't work, and Godzilla attacks again. During that second attack, Steve reports Godzilla's path of destruction live, right up until Godzilla tears down the building he's currently standing in. We cut to a mother holding her children close. We don't know what she's saying because she isn't translated and the music drowns out her words.
Yeah, there's a different fucking soundtrack, and it's not as good. It's really cliche.
We're now back to the beginning, at the hospital after Godzilla's destruction. Emiko tells everyone about Serizawa's oxygen destroyer. Emiko and Ogata try to convince Serizawa to use it, but Serizawa worries about it, quote, falling into the wrong hands, without naming anything specific. Thankfully, a news report and a children's choir convinces Serizawa to join the fight. Just like in the original, Serizawa dives into the ocean and kills both himself and Godzilla with the oxygen destroyer. Unlike in the original, Yamane doesn't get his moment where he says if nuclear testing continues, then we'll need to worry about another Godzilla. Instead, reporter Steve Martin Fuck, I stumbled on myself.
Comedian Steve Martin closes off with a tight 5 about Godzilla.
Well, we had to deal with this lizard, but hey,
that's an impression.
That's a terrible Steve Martin impression. I can't do Steve Martin.
Don't worry about it. It's okay.
Instead, reporter Steve Martin closes us off with, quote, the menace was gone, and so was a great man, but the whole world could wake up and live again, end quote. So, Kayla, what'd you think?
Listen, I try not to publicly rag on movies because I work in the industry, and it's a little bit of an unspoken rule amongst those of us in the circus that you don't publicly talk shit about the other circus acts because you know how hard it is. Like, I'm really proud of the work that I did on iCarly specifically. iCarly is not what one might call prestige television. It doesn't get a lot of critical flowers, etc. Every episode that happened was a miracle. I can assure you, every episode, every line of dialogue that you ever saw make it to screen, an absolute miracle. Every movie is like that. Every TV show is a miracle that it happens because it's so hard and it's kind of difficult to explain to people how hard it is to make a movie. But this was fucking bullshit, man. What the fuck? It was... They cut out a half hour from the original movie. The original movie was like 96 minutes, and this is a 66 minutes, so there's 30 minutes of footage that is just gone. But also, they did shoot additional footage, which takes up that runtime. So like half of the original movie is gone. And I kind of, from a production standpoint, I understand probably why the soundtrack was different for some of those scenes, because it's not like they were getting the master file from Toho Studio that they could then download into Adobe Premiere or whatever, or Avid, and then like kind of go in and separate out the soundtrack. It's not like they had the master files for the soundtrack. It was probably that they had like the original footage, which would have like the sound and the film together, you know? I would love to resurrect some of these people and ask them what the hell. But the Yamane, I guess, was doing Duolingo on the boat on the way back because he was like, well, the Americans need to understand me now and we'll speak in English. The dubbing is so bad, it's comical.
It's so bad.
I hate, listen, here's the thing. I do not watch dubbed live action films. And this is the privilege of being a native English speaker, is there's always English subtitles, you know? Most movies that I watch are in English because most movies that I watch are either American productions or co-American productions because I'm American and that's what's in my theaters and accessible. And again, we talked about the domination of American pop culture in the world. When I do watch a foreign language film in live action, every day I will take the subtitled version over the dubbed version every single day. Because I will not put up with bad live action dub. Spoiled for riches over here I am. But this was atrocious.
We live in a privileged time because the original Godzilla movie, like the Japanese original cut, was not available outside of Japan for a long time. Like, this was the movie that not only like American audiences saw, but a lot of just general overseas audiences saw. Like, when they dubbed it in Italian, they dubbed this movie, not the original.
I think that this is kind of the thing with Godzilla and Japanese Godzilla films, is that a lot of them do have the worldwide distribution kind of gets tangled up in like legal stuff a lot, which is why I'm really anxious about whether or not I'll be able to purchase a DVD of Godzilla -1. I really hope I hope that Godzilla -1 gets added to the Criterion collection. I think that it really deserves it. Anyway, this movie, so no opening credits in the beginning. I thought that was kind of interesting that they just skipped that, but I guess like there's kind of a different credit situation. They just do it at the end.
They also reorder the events of the movie because we start out with the destruction of Tokyo.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Like starting out with the visual of like not only all the destroyed buildings, but also the main character like digging himself out from under rubble. I'll admit, that's a pretty good way to start a movie.
It's a great hook. I'm not mad about that. Like, okay, the thing with this movie, obviously, like, I can be righteously upset about everything about it. And the fact that they, like, did this, they inserted a white guy to be the narrator and the main character, and they did a bad job dubbing everything, and feels like a little slapdash, and it's so much more like watered down in so many ways, you know? Like, I can be righteous about all of that, but also when you're doing media criticism and analysis, you should take it in its context. Also, on the other hand, that was a great move. Like, when you're thinking, like, I need to bring in a new character and redo this entire film, starting, like, in media res like that, in the destruction with this new, this character, and being like, oh my god, what just happened? Holy, like, I mean, it was record scratch, freeze frame. Yeah, that's me. You're probably wondering how I got here. It works. It works. Like, that works really well. I will say this. One of the things that kind of kills me about this re-edit and about the insertion of Steve Martin is that the original film looks so good. The cinematographer and the director popped off. They were working. Rent was due, etc. I mean, obviously, like, the Godzilla Rampage destruction scenes were shot on a soundstage with, like, miniatures. In terms of, you know, when they're at people's houses and things like that, I don't know how much of it is on location versus how much of it is on the stage. But I couldn't tell. You know what I could tell? I could tell that Steve Martin was on a fucking stage every time because they were lighting that shit like Days of Our Lives. No shade. Like, what the hell? Like, just come on. A modicum of money. $5 even. Like, it just, It was like when you watch, if anybody watched the theatrical cut of Justice League, you can tell what Zack Snyder shot and what Joss Whedon shot. And that's bad. You shouldn't be able to tell when the other director was working, because movies all of the time, every major movie and also a lot of TV shows, they have more than one director. There is a second unit director out there getting shots. A lot of it is like the crowd shots or establishing shots or stunt shots, things like that. But you can't tell that it's a different director doing that because it's well done. This was not well done. And like, I get it with the body doubles. They had to with the body doubles.
It's so funny once you notice it, because you never stop noticing it.
What do you mean once you notice it? It's like a neon sign instantly.
They keep having to cut over to Steve Martin whenever someone's talking to limit the amount of time that you can notice the bad dubbing. Whenever he's talking to a character, most of the time the camera's on the back of that character's head. My favorite shot, though, is when Steve Martin calls up his university buddy, Dr. Zarazawa, and the shot...
They got his eye patch size.
They got the eye patch, but his face is being blocked by lab equipment, so you don't see his mouth.
Yeah. Zarazawa is in profile. They show, like, it's his eye patch, so I'd bet cold hard American cash that it was a white guy in an eye patch with a badly matched haircut. And then you can't see his mouth because it's blocked by all of the lab equipment. And that was probably the best that we saw of all of the double shots.
So speaking of Steve Martin, by the way, I know we're ragging on the dubbing, as we should. It was terrible. It was slipshod. For some reason, actor Raymond Burr also has a hard time speaking. Like, not only does he mispronounce like a few characters' names, like he calls the paleontologist Yamane Yamani, but also, and I wrote these down because I kept noticing them, he'll say things like helicopter, short-lived, and my personal favorite, sayonara.
Yeah, on those things, I do kind of wonder if that's sort of that transatlantic, like, 1950s thing.
That's just how they said it back then?
Yeah, I wonder if that's just what's going on. But I will say this, I think that Raymond Burr really phoned it in. I mean, this man was in a Hitchcock movie. Yeah. He could do better. I don't think he was really... And granted, he was acting to a tennis ball, so that's hard. I'll give him that. I don't think he was doing his best.
It is contested how much time he spent, like, on set actually shooting, because it's between, like, 5 days and, like, a straight 24 hours. It's like, there are several different stories on, like, how much time they actually spent shooting the Raymond Burr, Steve Martin scenes to put into the film. But, like, you have to imagine for all of those scenes, he just goes into a studio and it's like, all right, we're going to get these shots on the island set. We're going to get these shots in the office set.
Here's the thing. I am so mad at this movie, but also I get it. I've been there. You've no idea. You've been in the trenches. Wars, the trenches that I understand. I understand in so many visceral ways how awful, like, all of it was for the people that were really trying their best. Because again, when I say every movie is a miracle, every show is a miracle, it's so true. I've been there in many ways. I have been there, but also, dude, it's still not great.
I mean, they could have given the voice actors more time to do the voiceover dubbing. Maybe actually had the scenes playing while they were recording. They could have gave a shit about that part.
I just wonder, why no subtitles?
Well, audiences can't read.
I know, but
we are just now getting to a point where, like, subtitles in major movies are, like, tolerated. So during my research, I'm reading these articles about Godzilla, and specifically about Godzilla, King of the Monsters. And one article, which I'll have to find again, but one of the things they brought up was, like, yeah, they made all of these changes to make it more palatable to American audiences. And we can look back now and be like, wow, this was, like, an artistic travesty. But also, like, how recent was it where Parasite was nominated for an Oscar and everyone was so surprised about a foreign language movie being nominated?
Okay, and I see that point, absolutely. That being said, we have a long history. Like, it's not that no subtitles are allowed. It's just that the entire movie being in subtitles is not allowed. There are many films for decades where characters are speaking in a foreign language and there will be subtitles on the screen. And then, like, we cut to English speaking for whatever. Like the guys in like Red Dawn, you know, the Russians are speaking and it's like they're speaking Russian and there's subtitles and shit. Like, they could have had just a modicum of there's no subtitles in this film, guys. Anytime they're speaking Japanese, he has to turn to somebody and be like, what was that? Or they just ignore it and you don't know what they said. And I do really feel like they could have had, and I guess when the other characters are speaking to him directly and not through his best friend security officer Tomo. Oh, it's Toho
is the company
Studios
that
and then
made
Tomo.
Godzilla. Tomo's the guy.
Yeah. Yes, of course. Silly me. He has to turn to Toho to get like a translation or whatever, or he just kind of like narrates over it. I guess what kills me is that it feels almost arbitrary when they choose to do Tomo translating versus Steve's like voiceover narration kind of summing it up. And then also, like, when Imiko talks to him directly, yes, of course. Like, when a character directly talks to him, yeah, they gotta use English. But sometimes they don't do that. Sometimes it's like Yamane talking to this room of Japanese people in Tokyo, all native Japanese speakers, minus one guy, and suddenly he's speaking English. Like, you could have done the subtitles, or you could have done the other, like, if you're morally against subtitles, because apparently this movie is, then you could have done Tomo translating, or Steve Martin in his narration kind of summing up what's being said, because that was a huge thing that they leaned on.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it was a device that worked for them. Like, I get it. It worked, and it's what they had to do. And, you know, I'm not against voiceover narration, just to be clear. I think that it can be incredibly well used. And I also think that you can add in voiceover narration after you've shot stuff. The Veronica Mars movie infamously did not have Veronica's narration in the original script. That was something that they added in post, and I think it like really clinched the movie.
But I get your point that it's weird that it's like in some scenes they're speaking Japanese, and in other scenes, which are identical in circumstance to those previous scenes, they suddenly speak English.
Yeah, like that's what was like really killing me, because again, so much of this movie is like, I understand that you are working with certain constraints and guidelines, and you have to do things like you think you have to do this. And arguably, you do have to do this, because I'm not naive about like 1950s America. I understand. But it feels like you did all of your homework at the last minute. Like, it feels like they didn't put any sort of thought into how to do this, like, particularly well. It really does feel like, yeah, we were just trying to, like, make as much money as possible on as few dollars as possible. And we're kind of just like, I don't really care, you know, like, whatever the audience. Like, there's no respect for the audience, in my opinion.
This was just a monster movie that they were trying to get, like, to the audiences.
It wasn't even B-list. It was, like, C-list.
Yeah, and it shows in some of the marketing. I'm about to say a bad thing, but like the way they marketed this movie was like there was one famous poster that was like, Godzilla, King of the Monsters, makes King Kong look like a midget.
Oh,
that's how they marketed this movie.
Whoa. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Interesting tactic.
Yeah.
Godzilla going after King Kong. Sure. Don't love, you know, the language. It's outdated. We can look back on that and frown.
Godzilla and King Kong are intertwined from the beginning in a lot of strange ways. And we'll talk a little bit about that in our bonus episode where we watch the original King Kong film, which you'll be able to access if you go to our Ko-fi and pledge, just throw some pocket change at us, and you'll be able to listen to that bonus episode along with bonus episodes from our other shows. You'll get access to our private Discord. We'll go into all of that during our outro plug.
It's a plug. Also, we will be doing Godzilla versus King Kong, both the original and the reboot. I guess it's not
a reboot. It's just a new movie.
It's just a different movie, also titled Godzilla versus King Kong. Those are a part of, we consider those a part of the main Godzilla canon, so they will be in this main podcast.
Yes.
But yeah, okay, so anyway, back to Godzilla, King of the Monsters.
It's weird talking about this movie because, like, we've already talked about a good chunk of this movie in the previous episode.
That's the thing, is we're really only talking about kind of the differences. I feel like they reused footage, not like, oh, this is like the original footage, but I feel like sometimes when they were doing sort of big crowd shots, I was like, they're just reusing this clip. Like,
this will be a running trend in the Showa era of Godzilla movies. They really like reusing footage in these earlier Godzilla movies.
I just saw it, but okay. Also, love that Steve doesn't know any Japanese, really.
Not at all.
Despite the fact that he has Japanese friends, and
his university friend did not teach him a lick of Japanese.
I could be wrong, but I do believe he mentioned that he had been to Japan before. But okay. I mean, I've been to Italy, and I guess my Italian's not super great. Oh, the interior of the helicopter, that was bad.
Just gotta get that out of the way real quick.
It needed to be said. Okay, so one of the other things, too, in the original Godzilla film, which, we just discussed, occasionally the villagers on Oto Island would sacrifice a girl to Godzilla when fishing was scarce. They were afraid Godzilla was going to come for them, so they would send a girl out on a raft, presumably to be eaten by Godzilla. This only happened when fishing was bad. In times of famine, this is the sacrifice that would be made. Drastic times, drastic measures. In the American re-edit, when Tomo is explaining like this whole ceremony of Oto Island and the Godzilla legend to Steve Martin, he says the islanders used to annually sacrifice a young girl to Godzilla. Annually. Not in times of famine under great duress. Annually. I feel like that is important to note, that is a difference, because it paints the people of this island as, like, less civilized, basically, instead of as, like, desperate people taking desperate measures and sympathetic. Obviously sacrificing people is bad, but, like, it's more sympathetic. This is less sympathetic, and it kind of is, like, they're basically painting them as, like, savages, essentially, and, like, backwards and uncivilized, which don't love that. You want to make money off of this Japanese movie, but you don't want to treat the people with any sort of like respect or humanity, and you want to kind of talk down to them and degrade them a little, and in like small ways, and all in like small little ways, really, but it stacks up. Oh, also, he's like always smoking.
Oh yeah, well, it's the 50s.
No, but nobody is smoking in Japan. Like, nobody in the original movie is smoking. Maybe there's like, I never noticed people smoking in the original movie. This guy, every fucking scene he's in, he's got a cigarette or a pipe in his hand. He's constantly lighting up. And the fact that nobody else around him is smoking only makes it stand out, which is why I was like, I don't think anybody smokes in the original Godzilla. And, I don't care. Like, whatever. Like,
he's
that's how it happened.
He's a 1950s man.
Yes, people smoked all of the time, but it was just so... It was so stark because nobody is smoking in the original. And this is what I'm talking about, of like the Americans not really caring too much about like preserving the original that much. And maybe like that's the most niche, like smallest thing to nitpick on, is that this guy is constantly smoking, but nobody else around him is smoking. And maybe there's something to be said about like the availability of tobacco as a product in post-war Japan, because I remember there was this one little bit in Godzilla -1 where it's like, oh my god, you got tobacco? Where the fuck did you get tobacco? Because it was like really scarce or whatever during the war. So maybe it's partially like a whole thing about like the Japanese people, like tobacco's a luxury, like they're not smoking because they can't afford to. Meanwhile, this American's over here like a freaking chimney.
I didn't notice that myself, actually. I'm really glad you're bringing this up.
And it's one of those things, I noticed seatbelts in movies. I know smoking in movies, like, because it's when you work in TV, you get notes about like, oh, can we not show that? Or can we not have the character say that or do that because of the behavior that it might encourage? I think we had to take out a cigarette reference, actually, in iCarly once. I think we made a joke about a character wanting a cigarette or going to go having a smoke or something like that. Something like that, and then they're like, can you take that out? And we're like, all right, sure.
I was editing a commercial for like a local brewery at one point, and I had this B-roll of this guy like shotgunning a beer, and I'm like, this is gonna be great. This is exactly what they want people to do. And
That's
then they sent me back a note where it's like, hey, take this out. It'll encourage binge drinking. And I'm like, you're a brewery. You want that?
Nope. No, you don't. You cannot. There are very strict here we're going to take a side tangent here because this is kind of interesting, I think. There are very strict regulations for the alcohol, tobacco, and general, I guess now also marijuana industry and their advertisements. That's why whenever you're listening to or watching like a beer commercial or a liquor commercial or whatever, they'll always be like, drink responsibly. And when seatbelts became legal, like mandated legally, the government turned to Hollywood. It was like, can you help us? And so suddenly every character is buckling up before they drive, and every character is always wearing seatbelts because film is the most persuasive medium that we have. And while video games, of course, will not make your child violent, and film is not going to make you violent or whatever, it can subtly affect your behavior. And so having all of the characters on your TV show buckle up like it's totally normal, that does encourage people to use their seatbelts. Having characters smoking all of the time, it kind of does encourage smoking. So in the 90s, when they were going on like all of the, with all of these, the attitude of smoking changed, and they're like, we have to, it's really bad. We can't ignore the cancer any longer. Hollywood stepped up and started depicting smoking less. And it's kind of interesting. You'll watch Stranger Things season 1, and Joyce is smoking, Hopper is smoking, Steve smokes. It's not excessive, but people are smoking. By the time you get to Stranger Things season 4, nobody's smoking anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because Netflix was like, all right, fine, we won't show smoking. And I do kind of wonder if, it's period accurate, but I wonder if Netflix looked at Gen Z's nicotine addiction and looked at Stranger Things, which is very popular with Gen Z, and said, hey, can we pull it back a bit?
So Godzilla, King of the Monsters. I don't have that much else to say about this. I will say it is interesting that they cut out the scene with the Japanese reporter reporting on Godzilla, and instead it's Steve Martin doing that.
You still see the reporter die. You still see the Japanese reporter got, but they give his bit to Steve.
But they cut out some chunks of like the government meetings on like Godzilla. And I say this only because you like mentioned this in the previous episode. They cut out the bit where they cut over to like the group of women being like, hey, we shouldn't try to censor this. And then you have another group of people being like, no, we should try to like keep this news under the wraps. And they like, it's weird that they cut out that part, I think. But then again, they can only have so many.
You think it's weird that 1950s Hollywood was like, let's take out the bit about censorship. The Hays Code is happening, man.
That's true.
I believe the Hays Code has been implemented at this point in 1956 because like the Hays Code and McCarthyism, that was all over 1950s Hollywood. So many wonderful artists were getting blacklisted for having any sort of, whether they actually were communist or were just like mildly critical of capitalism, they were getting blacklisted all over the place.
This is at the tail end of McCarthyism. McCarthyism petered out around 1955. So this is like a year after like McCarthy got.
Okay, but it's not like McCarthy was disgraced and then instantly everybody was like,
fair enough, yeah,
show the titties on TV, let's do it, like we're still dealing with like forms of McCarthyism to this day. Like once you kind of introduce that sort of all-encompassing militant like censorship and regulation on media, it's really hard to get rid of it. So anyway, yes, They cut out the Nagasaki mention. There's only the one singular mention of H-bombs.
Resurrecting Godzilla,
like H-bomb testing. Because of course, like Americans are aware of H-bomb testing. And here's the thing. The other reason why they tell you, like, why they cut out at the end when Yamane's like, if nuclear testing continues, we will have another Godzilla. Las Vegas would have been pissed at the concept of getting rid of atomic bomb testing because that was one of their tourist attractions. And I'm not kidding. That was there was casinos and like restaurants or bars or whatever in Vegas that were like Atomic Cafe, and they advertised that you could have a view of the atomic bomb mushrooms on the horizon that were being tested off in the desert. An actual fucking thing that happened, and we look back on it and we're like, oh, that's horrifying. But again, they kind of didn't know because the government was being super shady about all of it. Of course they cut out the part about, should we tell people about this? No way are we gonna suggest truth to the citizens of the United States in 1956 when the government is hiding the effects of the atomic bomb testing. No fucking way. And then, also, one of the things that killed me about the dubbing is that and we talked about this a little bit, there will be no sound. Suddenly there's a scene happening and there is no sound for the scene, except when the actors speak bad dubbed English. The actors are speaking good English because they're all American actors.
Yeah, they didn't get that room tone.
Yeah. It's just silent. There's no music. You can't even, Serizawa is burning his research and there is no fire crackling. It's just so obvious. And I'm just like, they couldn't even get a Foley artist in here to help out a little? Damn.
They had a Foley artist, but they only gave him 5 hours around a table with a microphone.
And they're like, don't worry about those scenes. Yeah, no, that was it. What a film.
What a film. Kayla, what would you rate it?
1. It gets a 1 out of 5 stars, and it only gets I was gonna say half. You know what? I'll give it a 2. I'll give it a 2 out of 5 because I do think, like I said, there are some things where, again, starting in media res with this character under the rubble and his voice, I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of interesting. I think there were some choices that were made that could have been really good if they had been able to pull it off, but they didn't have any budget or time, apparently. I mean, if they did, Jesus Christ, what did they spend it on? Booze? The rap gifts? I don't know.
I mean, this is 50s Hollywood, maybe.
I didn't see it on the screen, that's for sure. But I will give it the 2 instead of a 1, because it is the film that is responsible for me being able to watch Godzilla -1 in an American theater and then getting to see Godzilla finally win his first Oscar. Arguably, this is the movie that is as much responsible for that as the original Godzilla is. And I think that is kind of an interesting little takeaway, is as bad as this movie is and as atrocious as this movie is, it is still also a cultural landmark and really important for where we are now, because it was good enough to the people of 1956 to spark their imagination in Godzilla and to familiarize themselves with this concept so that when Godzilla came back to their shores, they were willing to buy tickets. So
I need to tell you something. When Godzilla comes back to American shores, it is not Godzilla who comes back. It is Gigantus the Fire Monster. But we'll cover that more in our next episode. So Kayla, what will we be watching next?
Next, we'll be watching Godzilla Raids Again. We'll be watching the original Japanese, so be sure not to watch the English dub unless you want extra credit and to watch the movie twice. You can legally find this movie for free on services like Sling TV, Crackle, Amazon Freevee, and Pluto TV. If you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe, give us a rating, leave a comment, share with a friend. Follow us on social media. We got the links in the show notes. We also have a Ko-fi. You can support us there and get access to cool bonus content like extra episodes and access to the private Discord where you can talk with other geeks about Godzilla and all things Digital Kaiju. Check it out. Gorilla Whale is a production of Digital Kaiju Studios. It is hosted and produced by Kevin Carpenter and Kayla Knutson. Gorilla Whale has no official affiliation with Toho, Legendary, or any other companies associated with the Godzilla franchise. We just like him. We think he's neat. We thank you for watching along with us. Until next time, watch out for kaiju!